Hello! So this is a response to Taya Kennedy's fantastic video of explaining the meaning to the word and the origins of the word of Warlock. So I thought, as someone who lives in Scotland and studies at the University of Edinburgh Scottish History and Ethnology, I would sort of give my sort of interpretation of the word origins, how it's used in Scotland and whatnot, because I think she points out a brilliant makes a brilliant point about reclaiming words and that archaic words change through time, and we know that due to certain swear words that we use today don't have the original meanings as they used to back then, such as the word bitch. We call people a bitch, but we're not calling them a female dog. We call people bastard, but we're not saying that they are a child out of wedlock. Things change over time. And also the point that she made about, reclaiming a word. Like, we have reclaimed the word witch from its negative connotation. So why can't we do that with warlock? Because today it's still, through modern interpretations and older interpretation, the word warlock still has a negative connotation, whether you've seen it through historical or the average people, or you see it within the modern witchcraft movement of referring it to the term, from the Anglo-Saxon term via logger, meaning a traitor, or a oath breaker, a liar, even. And I always think when it comes to looking at word origins, there has to be. I've always been taught to critically analyze things in a certain way at university, and that is going through the three principles of looking at its historical background, how it's used, its cultural background, and where it's from, and looking at the linguistics as well of different words that may have similar sounds, similar meanings. So let's go into it. Historical background. So we know that the word warlock was the only used in Scotland. It wasn't used anywhere else up until the 20th century in Britain. It was simply a Scottish word for a term witch, and it never really had a gender attached to it, which I'll explain about that later. It was just another language use from the way up north of Scotland, parts of Forso, John of Groats, and particularly in Orkney and Shetland, where that word was originally used, and then through pop culture and media and that's where we see the male attached to it. We all probably remember old series during the 60s and the 70s of Bewitched and I Dream a Genie, like specifically Bewitched. They used to call a male practitioner of magic warlock. Tabitha and Samantha was witch, the same as her mum. Before that, through novels and literature, warlock comes through. Even Walter Scott, he's talking about the word witch and referring it to a male. But that wasn't always so, and I'll explain why. So originally, the word comes from far up north of Scotland, like I explained, and particularly in Orkney and Shetland. And so we'll go into now the cultural background. So these areas where this word is mostly used and comes from are, until the 15th century, was under rule of the Danes and Norwegian influence, and still today, you can see folklore and culture and language very close to their sisters across the sea. And you see in folklore all the referred to is I can't remember his name, but a folklorist in the 19th century, or the turn of the century, sorry. We have the acknowledgement of known as the witch's charm, which is essentially a witch's initiation, self-initiation rite in becoming a witch. And in that line, they're using, like, you can see these words are stemming from Norse words. Like they say the Mickle Wallower, the Mickle Black Wallower. Now, Wallower is very similar to Valor, which in Norse is someone who is a seeress, someone who sees into the future. I apologise if I get some of the Scandinavian wrong. It's not my forte. I'm more into the Gaelic culture, but I'll try my best to just what I know, a cultural background. And so, yeah, and in that charm also says, O Mace, it starts with, O Mace, the king of all that's ill, come fill me with the warlock skill. Now, in this self-initiation rite, known as the witch's charm, it's not referring to any kind of gender that is allowed to do this. It's not referring to that at all. And essentially, in records, a warlock was man or woman in Orkney and Shetland. So that's the cultural background. It's Norse influence. So we'll go into linguistics, following from the cultural background. So talking about them having more of a Scandinavian influence. And even today, if you ask someone from Shetland or Orkney or far up north, they will say Scotland's their country, but they never call themselves Scots. They'll either call themselves Orcadian or Shetlander. And they're very proud of their Norse heritage, which you'll see at the Uphellia celebrations of New Year, celebrating mid-January. So yes, linguistics. As today, like the old school of thinking of the word's origins, has long been thought that it comes from the Anglo-Saxon word "violaga," which I've explained: traitor, oathbreaker, liar. But however, there is another school of thinking within academia, and it's something that I've seen people writing about, and also within my experience at University of Edinburgh. And that is, and we'll see as I explain it, that take a note of the hard K in Warlock. And that's how people will pronounce it. So it's not Warlock, it's almost like loch, like you'd say a loch, like the hard K. So there's another school of thinking that it comes from the Old Norse word violacha, which essentially means someone who is an enchantress, someone who has the ability to sing or pronounce incantations and spells correctly and have a gift for it. A lot of the time in records and sagas, people who are Vordlacher, sorry. Again, apologise, I'm not very good with Scandinavian languages. They were seen as people behind the scenes of battle, doing chants and spells of warding of defensive magic against their enemies. So they were quite important in Warcraft, even though they're not actively getting involved in the battle. So you can see, and with the influence, so this at the time when this word is being used, even within like the 16th century, and the 17th century even, that word and the languages used in the Far and still to this day is very Scandinavian influence. Their culture, their language, with this, a lot of them speak Scots, but it's a different kind of Scots. And look, we have Doric in parts of Aberdeenshire. It's a different form of Scots, and they name that. I think with them and South, it's Orcadian, it's Shetlander. It's a different form of language. And we see that there's a lot of influence of Old Norse words coming through, and you can see people's surnames as well. That's very Scandinavian. So you see that it's more, influenced by Scandinavian culture than Anglo culture, far down, down the south, maybe more the borderlands. The borders definitely have a very strong Anglo influence in their culture and their language. And they speak very differently. So, in conclusion, it's in my mind, although we can't be always sure when it comes to history and origins of words and linguistics, but linguistically, in my mind and my perspective, it is more likely that it would have come from the Old Norse word vordlacha than violaga. And again, linguistics always, although words change and adapt through cultural changes and interactions, certain elements of words still hold true. And here we see the hard K in Warlock, Weerlacher, then Woordlacher, then Weerlager. It's very soft sounding at the end. So yeah, that's my interpretation, and I thank once again to Taya Kennedy for doing a fantastic video about explaining the word warlock. And yes, today we live in a world where you can refer yourself as anything you feel fits you. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Over now, Slan Shiva.